So yes, so I will talk today much more, not so practical. I will not do exercises, but I will talk about a social neuroscience and biological and psychological perspective on meditation. So what I have is a lot of scientific slides, a lot of data, a lot of brain slides. I hope I will not lose you. I will try to be as understandable as possible so that you really understand. So what I wanted to do first is to give you some insight, because if we want to cultivate compassion, empathy, wisdom, perspective taking, we first need to know, as a brain scientist, where do these capacities are processed in our brain. You know, how is the social brain working? And I will show you that we can actually distinguish between all these capacity, like theory of mind and empathy and compassion, that they are actually different capacity we can train with different things. And then I will show you one of the largest meditation study in science we have done so far, a 9 months meditation-based mindfulness compassion training study, the Resource Project. And I will show you a lot. We have almost more than 60 different scientific paper out. So I can, of course, not show you all the results. It's a study which started in 2018 and is still ongoing. So it's a very large study, but I will show you how meditation can change our social cognition, our brain plasticity, our stress system, body awareness, and our prosocial behavior. And then I will show you how we use the science-based programs now in a translational way to help society bring these practices, these secular science-based practices, into healthcare, into education, into different arms of society. So let me start with the first chapter, dissecting the social brain. We are social animals, and we have the capacity to communicate, to understand the other, to feel the other, to know what the other is thinking. And we have a lot of new knowledge in the field which I am working in. It's called social neuroscience. And social neuroscience means we want to understand the interaction between brains, not just how my brain in isolation works, but how do I understand other people? How do I feel other people? How do I feel for other people? And you see the first social emotion, like emotion contagion, empathy, compassion, we have marked them in red, and the color coding will go through all my talk. So all the emotions and the social capacity, the heart capacities, they are coded in red because they come from the heart, right? So, and what is important now is that you have to understand the difference between empathy and compassion. And in green, this is cognitive perspective taking. The scientific term is theory of mind, but it is the same. It's like taking the perspective cognitively of another person, knowing what he thinks or she thinks. It's not a feeling, it's not a social emotion, motivation. So let me talk about empathy. What we did in 2004 is a first experiment to measure empathy in the brain. And at that time, there was no possibility to measure social emotions, so not something which makes me sad or anxious, but I'm feeling with another person, I'm feeling the pain of another person, the suffering. So what we did is to put couples, like a woman in the scanner, right? She's lying in a scanner, and I can show you here, and then her husband is next to the scanner. And on the screen, when she is in the brain scanner, she sees flashes, and she gets painful stimuli, like a bee sting, ouch, you know, it's a nociceptive stimulus, a pain, very short without after effects, like here. Now she's like, ouch. So the brain is recording what we call pain matrix, is the process recording my own pain. And then sometimes she sees the husband getting pain, but she doesn't feel anything, but she knows now the husband is suffering, right? And this goes on for quite a long while. And in the brain, you can see in green, the networks which are activated when I'm really suffering pain, no? And it's a very big network called the pain matrix. And in red, you see the networks which are reactivated, and I have them here again. These networks in blue here, the anterior insular and the AMCC, are the core networks for empathy for pain. This means we share in our brain, we share the feeling of ouch, oh, this is unpleasant, the negative emotion with the other. So we have these shared networks where our brain is basically literally suffering with the partner or the other person outside of the scanner, even though my body and my system doesn't get any direct input. So we call that empathy. Empathy is sharing the pain of the other, or sharing the joy. So the important thing is empathy is not restricted to pain or suffering. You can share joy, you can share gratitude, you can share disgust, and depending on which emotion you share with the other, you will have different brain networks activated, always the network which share this emotion in yourself, which are processing this emotion in yourself, the joy in yourself or the disgust. So you know what the other feels by activating networks in your brain who are processing these feelings usually in yourself, right? Or parts of the network. So this is what we now call the empathy for pain network, right? The empathy network for suffering. Now, at that time, when we discovered that we have empathy network in the brain, I was very naive and I thought, oh, we have to train the whole world, right? The whole world needs to be trained in empathy to become a better world. And so when you do plasticity research in neuroscience, when you want to start training and looking at training effects, you usually start with experts. You usually look for who in the world are the experts. So for example, if you want to do plasticity on motor system, no? Do you want to know whether the representation of your finger get better through practice? You look for expert pianists or violinists who have done thousands of hours of piano or violin studies. But I wanted to look for expert in empathy and compassion. So where did I find, I wanted to understand, is there, like a plasticity for empathy? And I told you that empathy is sharing the emotion. And what I discovered, and I will tell you how, is that actually compassion and empathy are two very different social emotions. They are both responses to the suffering of another, empathy for pain and compassion, but empathy is feeling with someone, sharing the same emotion. You suffer, I suffer. Compassion is a feeling of concern. It's a feeling, it's a motivation to help. It's coming out of care. It's a feeling for someone, not with. So this was where I found my expert. I was a board member, and I am still member of the Mind and Life Institute, which since the 80s has the dialogue with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and a lot of, very high-level trained monks and geshes. And so I was a part, so the Western scientist meeting with Eastern contemplative practitioner. And the Dalai Lama said, in 2000, let's not talk just philosophical about how West and Eastern contemplative science can work together, but let's do really empirical work. And so he encouraged people like Mingyur Rinpoche, and here you see Mathieu Ricard below, to come to our labs, to fly into our scientific lab, and to let the brain measured either through EEG or through brain scans. And Mathieu Ricard became a very good friend of mine because he's also, I'm half French, he's French, and he has a degree in biology, a PhD. So he knows Western science a lot, but at the same time, he also is a very high level Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, which had very big masters. So we scanned his brain and we asked him to go in very different states. No, I asked him, because I thought I wanted to measure empathy. So I asked him to imagine a video, a BBC video he has seen, where, you know, little children are starving in an orphanage, and it's very, very horrible images, this documentary about starving children, and it's a lot of suffering. And I put him in the scanner, and I was expecting to see the empathy for pain network I had shown you before. No, I had seen in hundreds of people in London, in Zurich, in Switzerland, everywhere. And what I saw is actually when he went into metta meditation, loving kindness, compassion, different states of compassion, is another network, a network lighting up in the brain, which we usually know to be more like positive emotion of love, affiliation, care, and reward. So I was very confused. I was like, is he thinking about his lunch and the cakes he will eat, or what is he doing? He doesn't seem to suffer with these children in this orphanage, he should imagine, in his meditation. So I asked him, I said, what are you doing? I'm very confused. I don't see you empathizing with these kids. You don't show these networks I know. And he's like, yeah, you did not ask me to suffer with these kids. You asked me to go in states of compassion. So I was like, oh, wow, really? So you don't have to suffer with when you are in compassion? No, he's like, this is a motivation to really want the welfare of the other person and feelings more of warmth and of love and of care. So I was stunned by that because it's really a different network. And so I said, could you just go in empathy and don't do what you are taught in Buddhism. Don't go in meditation of compassion and metta. Only suffer with these images of the children as if that would be your pain, right? Go in empathy, what we call empathy. And so he was like, why should I do that? And then I was like, for the sake of science, please do it so that we understand whether you also have the empathy for pain networks we know. So he went into this other state, and when he came out of the state, when I asked him, do you want to go out of the scanner? He said, oh my God, no. Please, can I do some blocks of compassion and loving kindness? I'm burning out. If I only do this empathic distress, I'm coming into empathic distress. I'm suffering so much with these children that it feels like a burnout in the scanner. Can I do for myself the sake to get myself rebalanced, compassion and metta? And this is where we really understand something important, because when he went into compassion and loving kindness again, the other network lighted up again. So we understood a model we have now developed, and we have done huge amount of studies, not in monks, but in normal people who have never meditated, who are like students or just naive. And we understood that when you are confronted with suffering in a normal, non-trained brain, in just normal human brains, you have an empathic, healthy response. You share the suffering with the other. However, if the suffering becomes too big, or it is hitting an own trauma in yourself, like what we see a lot with refugee help here, then this healthy empathic resonance, the sharing of the feeling with the other, can move into what Batson had already called empathic or personal distress. So then it becomes your own stress, your own negative emotion. It's very self-absorbing, it's very strong negative affect. And if you are chronically in empathic distress, which can happen in healthcare profession like nurses or doctors, you can burn out, you can withdraw from the world, become cynical, objectify the patient, and be in distress and stress yourself. So what we are teaching, or what we learned, is what we have to teach people is how to recognize a healthy empathic first response and move into compassion. And this is what we did in many studies now with students, with people who are not like experts brain like Mathieu. And we could see that if we teach them empathy, you see these empathy for pain networks, the blue one I showed you before, no, the anterior insula, getting more activated after training. So what we call plasticity of the empathic brain. You can teach people to become more empathic, and then these networks will become more active. But the interesting thing, they will come with more negative affect, with a sensitization to sharing the pain and more negative feeling. However, when the same people get trained in compassion and how to move into this caring, loving concern and this motivation for care and help, then you see the red network, these kind of compassion-based, affiliation, care-based, positive emotion networks lighting up, and it comes with an increase of positive emotion. So we can really show in many studies now that empathy and compassion relying on two very different networks. And even though empathy is healthy, if we don't have empathy, we are psychopaths, right? We should have empathy. We should be able to feel what the other is feeling, to resonate with the other. However, there is a danger that if it's becoming too much and you don't, the self-other distinction blurs, you are not aware anymore that this is the emotion of the other, but it becomes your own, like an emotion contagion almost, then you can end up in empathic distress. And so we are teaching people in the study I will show you next how to move from a healthy empathic response into compassion, because compassion is resilient. Compassion, you cannot burn out of too much compassion. And it's a pity because in the West, in the 70s, 80s, in the clinical domain, people have coined the term compassion fatigue. But actually, they didn't know about these differences at that time. It was early days. We should not call it compassion fatigue, because you cannot burn out of too much compassion, of too much love, right? You can burn out of empathic distress, of too much empathic personal distress. So we should call it empathic distress fatigue, but that's a bit too late because the term is out there. So why do we have this, like green network? What is this other social network, understanding the thinking of others? So the theory of mind is also called cognitive perspective taking, and that is more like wisdom, like reflective ability. It is the capacity to understand other people's thought, not like share feelings or have loving concern for the other, motivational system. It's a cognitive system. And it allows you to read the mind of others, to take the perspective of the beliefs of others, to understand that someone, has other beliefs. And why do you need, if you have compassion, you have a huge motivation to help and, to want the benefit of the other. However, the problem with compassion, with the biological compassion or like not trained compassion, is that it favors in-group people. It favors people of your family, your friends, your in-group identity, your national identity, religious identity. However, if someone is very different, if someone has hurt you, if someone has a different religious background, is from a totally different nation, language background, you might not really easily have compassion, and feel this warmth. And then you need cognitive perspective taking. You need the ability to understand, oh, this person has a different religious background, and this is why this person acts so strangely for me, because she or he has different beliefs. There is a different belief system guiding the action. And if you can do this perspective taking, you can solve conflicts. It's very important for conflict resolution. And we can, again, use a brain scanner to scan in the brain these different networks while people looking, at videos and, doing tasks. We can scan and see that the cognitive perspective taking network in green is another network than the empathy and compassion networks I showed you before in red. Yeah, so compassion, loving kindness, empathy are social emotions. So they rely on networks which are limbic, which are embodied network in the brain, the insula. But the cognitive perspective taking relies on a network which is called mentalizing or theory of mind network. And the interesting thing is that they are not correlated. So some people are, when they are, confronted with the minds or the suffering or the emotions of others, they empathize very quickly and activate a lot of the wet network, the empathy network, but they don't so much, they are not so good in social cognition, like in this kind of perspective taking, the social cognitive skills. They don't really put themselves in the shoes of others. And the other way around is true too. Some people are very good putting themselves in the shoes of others, but they don't empathize a lot. The extreme case is psychopaths. They can read the minds of other people very well. They know exactly what the others need and can manipulate other people, but they will not feel empathy and compassion. They don't care. So we have these three networks. We have these empathy network, compassion, and we have perspective taking, theory of mind networks. And so we can also train them differentially, right? It's a bit like, it's not muscle because these are brain networks, but imagine in sport, you have different muscles in your body, arm muscles, leg muscles. And when you go in a fitness club, you use different machines to cultivate and train these different muscles. And the same is true for our complex mind. We need to use different, mental techniques, meditation-based techniques of different kinds to train these different capacities, these different human social capacities. So I will now talk about the resource project, which is a 9 months longitudinal study. And perhaps if I have time, about a 10 weeks online training study we did in COVID time, the COF social program, where we did some of these mental exercises of the resource project, but only online, only 12 minutes, very low doses. Resource project is one of the largest projects, and we wanted to see if through science-based mental training of different kinds, we can actually reduce loneliness, reduce stress, heightened individualism, narcissism, depression, whether we can actually do something about poverty and climate crisis. And the aim was to see whether scientifically we can gain evidence whether we can enhance compassion, empathy, perspective taking, the skills I just showed you, if we can, have social connectedness improved, like getting people more connected to each other, global cooperation, shared humanity, and increase mental health by reducing stress and decreasing depression and, fostering the immune system. So this is a huge study. It's not just a little experiment. It's almost 20 years of a study of preparation, getting the money, the paradigms, 100 people involved as researcher. And we are still publishing because we gained 9 terabyte data. So it's a very, very big study. I'm just trying to summarize it shortly for you. We had 300 German speaking, because I'm in Germany, in Berlin and Leipzig, and they did a 9 months training study, and they had different cohorts. And the first 3 months module was what nowadays we would call mindfulness-based meditation module. But it's all very secular meditation. It's not trained in a Buddhist context because we could not have done science. It's a secular meditation approach. And so we trained attention-based, basic shamatha practices and, basic mindfulness practices like, getting present in the moment, body scan, breathing meditation, sound meditation, smell. So becoming present to sensory inputs, whether they are in the body or in the surrounding. The red module, you can perhaps already guess, the red module is a care and compassion based module. So here we are trying to activate this care system, the system I showed you, underlying gratitude, compassion, loving kindness, the network which Mathieu Ricard had activated when he went into these wholesome states of loving kindness, metta compassion, care and compassion. And then in green, you can guess, this is all practices which are, practicing and cultivating your reflective capacities, your cognitive, your wisdom capacities. And the blue group, they're heroes, because they don't learn any training, they don't do anything, and they just get tested every 3 months. Before and after 3 months module, everyone got tested, T1, T2, T3, and they are our baseline retest control group. So they don't learn anything but get tested with the same 90 measures. We had retreats with 80 people of one group. At the beginning of a 3 months module, we had a 3-day intensive retreat where people would learn these practices, get taught into how to do them correctly by a team of 17 meditation teachers who were trained with me in these 9 months protocol, in these 9 months. And we had an app so that throughout the 9 months, if you were on holiday and at home, you could do 30 minutes of practice of 2 of the core exercise every day at home. So the first 3 months in the mindfulness attention-based module, they did every day 30 minutes breathing meditation and body scan. In the compassion-based affect module, they did 20 minutes of loving kindness, of metta meditation every day. And then you see this symbol with 2 people. We invented a new format of meditation, which is a partner-based 12 minutes exercise where you learn empathic listening with another partner you are coupled with. We call them Diet. And I will show you they are very, very powerful exercises because you have, every week you change partner. So you have a real other person. Just it's like a loud meditation. You are reflecting on vipassana, on difficult emotions or gratitude. So you are doing a loud meditation and the other is just empathically listening. It's not a chit chat, not a dialogue. And then you reverse roles. So you're just meditating together, but through the witness of another person, you are actually really cultivating social skills like compassion, empathy, shared humanity. So in the cognitive module, there are both social modules in the sense that we also had one classic meditation alone every day, observing thought. But then we also had a diet. We had this partner-based exercise where you learn every day through specific technique how to take the perspective of another person, how to basically leave your own beliefs and understand what the other person is believing and thinking. And so we had this app, as I said, and we measured 90 different measures from, genes, questionnaire, brain measures, health measures, hormonal measures, subjective, qualitative interview, behavioral measure. It was huge, huge amount of measures. And we had a very big compliance, less than 80% dropped out. So the people really practiced every day and they all stayed there until 9 months. And you see here how this dyadic practice work is, the app is connecting you. So if you are in, every week They came together for 2 hours with the teacher. Every week, the 20 little group came together to practice with the teacher and to be coached by the teacher. And then they would do the diet face by face. So instead of meditating alone, they meditate face to face. But every day they would do it by a cell phone app. And so through these dyadic contemplative diets, you learn, depending on the question of the diet. In the affect module, we had an affect diet. So it's fostering, the heart qualities, empathy, compassion, gratitude, connectedness. In the perspective module, we had a metacognitive perspective taking exercise, a different one, where you use inner part work and other things. And what we found, because this exercise was so new, people said, Tania, you are crazy. People will not do 12 minutes meditation with someone they don't know, and over 3 months, and try 3 months every day, 12 minutes. But they did. They really did. They loved the diet. And you see that people, we asked them, how close do you feel to the other partner before the exercise diet and after the partner exercise, the diet? And you see that they feel much more close after the diet, and every week of the practice they feel more connected to people even before they even start a diet. So even if they get connected to a person they don't know, they feel already closer and connected. And when we ask them, how, because one question of the affect diet is, in the middle of your day, tell me a situation where you felt a difficult emotion or stress, and how did that feel in your body? And so they have to explore body awareness and difficult emotion and accept them and just be with them. And then the second question is, how much gratitude did you feel in tell me a situation where you felt gratitude, and how did that gratitude feel in your body? And that's fostering care and resilience. And you see that they will be more trusting every week. They are telling more intimate and more personal emotional disclosure to the other. So what we learned is that this intersubjective type of meditation format is very powerful in getting people out of loneliness, out and reconnecting them with self and others, and working in terms of shared humanity and common humanity. It's like a social glue. So now I want to come back to what I said before. Could we actually, increase attention, compassion, and perspective taking, and how did that change the brain? So first, behavior. I'm just making it short for you. We could show that after 3 months of shamatha mindfulness-based practice in the presence module, in the first module, you could increase attention on a very famous attention task. But also, when you did compassion-based practice every day, the attention also got better. So it's not specific to this mindfulness module. Also, when you engage in 30 minutes of compassion-based mental practice, you also get attention better. However, compassion, as we measured it with this task I showed you, with these videos where you have to, empathize and compassion with these stories of people suffering, compassion only really increased after these compassion-based affective modules, where we teach explicit compassion practice, gratitude practice, loving kindness practice, perspective, affect diet. You see here in red, mindfulness practice like shamatha practice alone is not enough to increase after 3 months compassion. And when you look at the social cognition and the cognitive perspective taking task, the social intelligence task, right? It is only after doing the perspective diet every day in the perspective module, in the green module, where you show an increase in this capacity to take the perspective of another. So doing an affect diet is improving compassion, empathy, but not this theory of mind cognitive module. So it really matters what you practice, right? And we see that even more clearly when you look at the brain. You see that when you look at the brain, you have different networks growing in gray matter plasticity. So let me unpack that. It means, like, if you would imagine a computer, it's not the software, it's the hardware of the computer. It's the gray matter of our cells. And if you train a lot, they get thicker. They just get thicker. And so what we are showing you here is the networks in the brain in yellow who get thicker, who get trained, is what we call gray matter structural plasticity in the brain when you have done 3 months of mindfulness training and shamatha training. It's prefrontal areas, monitoring areas. However, in the very same brain, 3 months later, when they did the compassion-based module, or even if they did, we had one group which did only compassion-based module immediately. Also, they showed gray matter increase in these limbic, in these emotional, socio-emotionally relevant networks, the insula, the IFG, this whole network I showed you to be important for empathy and compassion, right? And then in green, you see here, especially, there is an increase in a region called TPJ, which is very important for this perspective-taking ability, the gray matter increase in the same brains again. And the thicker this region gets through training, the better people become in social cognitive tasks, in social intelligence tasks I have shown you before. And the same is true, the thicker the insula, this interoceptive body cortex, this emotional cortex, the thicker this gets, the more compassion they develop. So there is a correlation between changes in the brain through training and changes in observable behaviors and social cognition. So that was quite revolutionary, actually, because so far people have always said, no, you can, first, you cannot train old brains, no? The structural plasticity is declining from the age of 25. The brain just gets thinner, the gray matter is shrinking because of aging, but you cannot, let it grow. And certainly not, our participant had an average of 43 years. So that was like, wow, we can actually change our brains and the structure of our brains through just 30 minutes of daily training. It was an intense training because we also had weekly and retreats, but you can change that, and it will change your behavior, your subjective well-being and a lot of things. So yes, we can. And then these data also show an incredible new thing. It really matters what you practice. We should stop saying mindfulness or meditation. It's an umbrella term. But depending on what these people did 3 months every day, you have totally different networks and different capacity coming online. And so it's really important to differentiate about practices in our field. And of course, all the Buddhist scholars know that since many 100 years, but that's just scientific evidence for it. Okay, so now after having shown you, like social connectedness data, brain data, social cognition, attention data, I want to talk about stress. And that was very interesting because that MBSR, like this 8-week secular mindfulness program, which made the whole world, John Kabat-Zinn has designed and developed it, 8 weeks of mindfulness training, and there is called MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. So one main aim of these secular mindfulness programs is to reduce stress. And if you ask people in questionnaire, you see a lot of, I feel less stressed. But we asked, do the hormones, the stress hormone, also respond so easily? So what we did, how do you measure stress in the lab? And we were particularly interested in a specific type of stress, which is called social stress. It's like the stress you experience if you feel with other people to be not good enough, to be evaluated, to have not worked enough, to be not intelligent enough. So if you feel socially judged, we have a stress response. And how do we measure that in the lab? You see this person needs to give a job talk. And there is this committee which is trained, instead of being nice and responsive and socially evaluative, they are sitting like that with their white shirts, and they are like really like severely looking, and she needs to say why she is great to be, you know, taken as a pupil at Max Planck. And so we are basically stressing, and we are measuring the cortisol stress hormone. We are measuring the cortisol response, which is a response we have if we are socially stressed, through saliva pipettes. So what came out? This is the group which didn't learn anything. So you see they have this beautiful cortisol stress response, so we could stress people with this task. And now the surprising thing is we had absolutely no reduction in this cortisol response after 3 months shamatha mindfulness practice. If at all, it was going a bit higher. And we know that more and more, that there is at the beginning a sensitization to stress happening if you start listening to your body. However, the modules, you know, the compassion-based and the perspective, so the mindfulness model did not reduce social stress at all on the hormonal level. And that was a real surprise. So then we thought, how about the social models, the compassion-based perspective-taking modules? And they could reduce social stress to 51% of the level. And that is probably due to this dyadic practice, because you remember both in the perspective and in the compassion-based module, you had this dyad practice, which is training people not to judge the other, just to listen non-judgmentally and to just resonate empathically or compassionately with the other. And the other is sharing very deep stuff, vulnerability, but then they learn, oh, I will be the listener in 5 minutes, so why should I judge? Why should I be judged? So they learn not to be afraid of judgment of the other anymore, and to just feel the shared humanity. We are all humans, we are all suffering, we are all vulnerable, we are all frail. And this is probably the reason why the mindfulness module didn't change this response, but all the modules which had dyads, which are social modules where you learn that, could reduce social stress to a huge amount. If we use questionnaire, like a lot of mindfulness studies have done, like MBSR studies, you see also already a subjective reduction in stress after 3 months, also after present, but it is not at the hormonal level of stress. So I think this is why we are now using this dyadic practice in a COVID study to help alleviate the stress and the very high vulnerability mental health problems we have after, you know, being 2 years in a pandemic and in social isolation and lockdowns. So if I have time, I'll show you some data about this last study, the COF Social Project, where we are using these dyads to have a more, you know, scalable approach to reduce stress. So now I want to show you some data about prosocial behavior. So can these practices boost, you know, your cooperation, your donation, your trust, your prosocial behavior? And so we had a lot of questionnaires, self-report, people saying, how prosocial do I feel? But we also had a lot of real tasks, you know, also from economic background, game theoretical economic tasks, where people had to really give money. They really had to show behavior, like prosocial behavior to others, and not just say what they think they are, but it's like observable donation behavior or money giving behavior. And what we see, if you look at all the just behavioral altruistic behavior, it was only the compassion-based care module, the 3 months affect module, which could reliably increase altruistic behavior. Again, the attention-based mindfulness and the perspective could not increase prosocial altruistic behavior. you needed to do explicitly, care-based. And it makes sense because the care system is evolutionary and altruistic system. It's why mothers would jump under a car to rescue their child if the child is in danger without thinking a minute, right? They would just jump and rescue the other and help the child to survive, even if they would, give their own lives for that. This is a very purely altruistic motivation system. So that is an important news, because economists think that taking the perspective of another will make the world a better place. But these data suggest you need this motivational system, the care system, to be activated. And if you look at questionnaire, that's funny. People every 3 months, they say, I'm getting more and more prosocial, I'm getting more and more nicer. So you have this, like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months increase in prosocial behavior. But if you look at whether the people who really behave more prosocially, give more money, trust more, do something, are the same people who say that they are getting more prosocial, you have a zero correlation, meaning no, they are not the same people. So what you think about yourself is not the same than how you really behave in very concrete situations, whether you really give money away. And we have that a lot, that these subjective measures do not correlate so well and not predict so well, these questionnaires, the real, hormonal behavior, or like behavior, hormonal or brain data, like the more objectivable. Okay, so I think, skip the body awareness part to have a bit of more time to conclude. I just jump to the summary. And I hope that with this resource project, I could show you, yes, we can, right? We have really a lot of evidence in the resource project that we can cultivate all kinds of beneficial and wholesome emotions, behaviors, and states through short secular mental practice. I mean, short, it's a 9-month study with 3 months module, but when I mean short, they had to do, about 30 minutes, 6 days a week. And so that's not like hours and hours of meditation like yogis would do, or, expert meditators. And people could do that and integrate that in their real life, as you saw. And what I could also hopefully show you is it really matters what you practice. So you find different results. So for example, attention gets boosted through the shamatha and mindfulness practice. Data I did not show you, but also like cognitive capacity, like working memory gets better after 3 months of mindfulness shamatha practice. However, compassion and altruistic behavior could only after 3 months be, increased after the compassion-based affect module, right? So you needed explicit cultivation to really boost compassion and altruistically motivated behavior. However, perspective taking, the social intelligence and social cognitive skills could only be really boosted through the daily perspective exercises, either observing thought or the diet, the perspective taking diet. And this, I showed you, was reflected in brain plasticity. Different networks in the brain, the structure of these networks, the gray matter volume, increased after these modules in different ways. So after the compassion-based networks, which are important for empathy, compassion, gratefulness, socio-emotional network got bigger, attention network got bigger after shamatha and mindfulness, attention-based practice, and perspective taking, mentalizing networks here in green got bigger after these perspective taking exercise every day. So it's very specific. It matters what you practice. I also showed you that whereas, this social stress, cortisol, on the cortisol level, could only be reduced to social intersubjective practices, which include the other, and not just through shamatha and mindfulness practice alone. You didn't see any reduction in the hormonal cortisol level after a social stressor. And I didn't show you these data, but body awareness, you can, through all meditation, you can increase interoceptive body awareness, like knowing what your body is telling you, the signals of your body, which is really important, but it takes a lot of time. So now, before ending, I just want to show you how we use these approaches now in the COVID time, in a study where we measured, from January 2020 to 21, Berliners, and we asked them, between 18 and 65, we asked them a lot of, mental health questions, social cohesion, resilience, a lot of questionnaires. And what we showed, and perhaps it would be the same, in your country, is whenever participants went into lockdown, in social isolation and lockdown. Here in Germany, it was the first one was in 2020, and then there was a reopening in June. So, like the levels of depressivity, loneliness, stress, and anxiety, what we call psychological vulnerability, they recovered. So first you had this increase in mental health problems and psychological vulnerability, then they recovered. And then we went into a very long second lockdown from November to March 21 in Germany. So it was 6 months of lockdown. And you see what we call a lockdown fatigue effect. So people with every month felt more lonely, more depressed, more anxious, and so on. And a lot of COVID studies showed that the youngest among us, the youngest population suffered most, and the women. And so they had more negative states, more negative emotion, more depression, and so on. You can read all these data in a brochure, in a freely downloadable brochure, which shows all these other, we had 3 hours of questionnaires, so many variables. But what is important is that we started to do a pure online training with mindfulness versus diets to see whether we can do something about the loneliness epidemic, which is, very strong after the pandemic in America, Europe, and across the world. Especially young people are feeling very lonely and depressed, and it's a really a huge mental health problem coming along our way, and is exacerbated by the pandemic. And so what we did is to implement 10 weeks of purely online training, only 12 minutes, either mindfulness exercise or these partner-based dyadic socio-emotional, the affect diet I have talked about in the resource project, and a waitlist control again. And so what the data, we just analyzed the data, so I can't show you the data, but I can tell you that it is very promising. It looks really as if only doing 12 minutes, only online with some Zoom teachings of these mindfulness and diet practice can actually really reduce depression, anxiety, stress, and increase connectedness. And when it comes to bring people out of loneliness and reconnect them, the dyadic practice are much more powerful. They are, because you do them with another person, and so you reconnect in a more social way than if you are just meditating. But when it comes to emotion regulation, stress reduction, anxiety and depression reduction, the mindfulness group is also doing very well. So this is very promising, and this is why we are translating these approaches now, beside doing just science. We are translating, these retreats we developed in the resource project in different ways. I'm teaching, for example, here you see masterclass with healthcare provider. They are all nurses and healthcare people and doctor, clinicians, therapists who have suffered a lot in the pandemic because the hospitals were totally overwhelmed, right, with the COVID and the pandemic. And so we are teaching them self-compassion and how to move from empathy into compassion instead of empathic distress, how to, build up resilience, avoid burnout. And so we are teaching these meditation practices to these healthcare provider. On the right side, you see an open society masterclass. And after the retreat they do, 3-day really intensive silent retreat, they go into 8-week dyadic course. So the group continues in their everyday life to train the capacities, like self-compassion and empathy and compassion and resilient strategies in their daily life through partner-based dyadic exercise every day for 8 weeks. And that is amazing, because then somehow you translate the knowledge you learn in retreats into your daily life at work, in the hospitals, wherever you are, with another person, and that's quite magic work. So I'm advising a company who is just starting, and the intention is to bring these intersubjective meditation practices, diets, into a large scalable online platform with onboarding webinars, with diet coaches, with teaching, and then you can do and practice these diets over months if you want in your daily life to help society recover from increasing level of depression, loneliness, anxieties, and disconnection from themselves. So here I want to end with a big thanks. This is my COF social group, my group, which I have at the moment in Berlin, who are supporting this last study, not resource project, is 100 people I could thank. This is the present group. And here are some web pages. You find a lot of information. I know it was a lot of information on www.taniasinger.de. This is my web page. And you will find a lot of sub pages, and you will find all 60 articles of the resource project there, and also podcasts and talks where you can revisit the slides. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for impressive presentation, Dr. Singer. I wish we had more time for you.
Now I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Now I don't hear you.
Oh, you don't hear me? Okay, thank you very much for your impressive presentation. I wish we had more time for you. Thank you so much. Because of the time issue, we might have to skip Q&A session, I guess, or I will ask just one quick question, okay? 질문 하나 빨리 묻도록 하겠습니다. 공감신경회로와 연민신경회로를 구분하여 연구하게 된 계기가 궁금합니다. Okay.
Like in the talk, I explained in the talk that I stumbled over the difference of empathy, compassion, because I wanted to train the social emotion. And then I understood through working with Buddhist monk that actually empathy and compassion are two very different social emotion, and that actually if you want to train something in the world, it is better to train how to move from a healthy empathic response into compassion, because compassion is very resilient and it's a very wholesome post-social motivational care system-based state, which can help other people and yourself and build up resilience and avoid burnout. So this is what we understood, and this is what we are now training nurses and everyone, is how to recognize these different states in yourself and how to build resilience through moving from healthy empathy to compassion, and how to, we're also training how to, if you end up in empathic distress, it happens very quickly. Nowadays also in hospital, it's so little time. So we also teach people how, when they are in empathic distress, can use self-compassion and other techniques to move out of the distress and then into compassion for others.